Good evening and welcome to Educational Innovations 360 Degrees live chat. I'm David Johnson of Transform Ed Consulting. And first, I'd like to thank Cassandra Williams. Educational Innovation 360 Degrees is Cassandra Williams' brainchild, and she is an educational influencer and the CEO of Educational Innovations 360 Degrees. Our guest tonight is my dear buddy, 𝐥𝐢𝐤 𝐤𝐤. 𝐥𝐢𝐤 𝐤𝐤 is professor in the Department of Demography at the University of Texas at San Antonio. He has written extensively in the areas of demography, Latinos, race, inequality, immigration, health disparities, aging, public policy, social justice, and COVID-19. 𝐤𝐤 is co-author of Latinos in the United States, Diversity and Change, and co-editor of the International Handbook of the Demography of Race and Ethnicity. He recently received a 2020 Sabre Espoda Academic Excellence Award from the University of Arizona's Department of Mexican American Studies. Welcome, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here with you, David, and thank you for the invitation.
It's my pleasure. We've been trying to get together for a year or more, and finally, tonight is the night that we are getting together for the first time.
That is great. Yeah.
And I see this as the first of many opportunities where we will collaborate on various projects.
Exactly. Yeah, we have that plan. The next step is we're going to get together live in person.
Yes.
Whenever the time permits.
Yeah, especially now that the pandemic is working its way behind us. COVID-19 is working its way behind us.
Right.
Well, sir, you are very, very prolific in your scholarly activities. And moreover, you're on TV, you're in the newspapers, speaking about COVID, speaking about social justice, speaking about issues involving minority race people. How did you get to this place?
It all begins. I was born and raised in the Rio Grande Valley down in South Texas, a little town, Mercedes, right in the middle. And so I was born 1958. So this is, we're talking about getting close to the 1960s. This was a time of the Chicano movement also that was taking place. And it was a community that there was major racism. The power structure was a white community, even though we're 90% of the population. And so there was high levels of poverty, segregation, you name it. And that really was kind of the heart of, in terms of when I went to Pan American University there in the Valley. First, I studied social work. And then I found sociology, and that really became my passion. And then I found demography also, which gave me kind of the tools to assess and think about inequality and social justice and so forth.
Well, that was one of the questions I had. You started out working in social studies. You were professoring in social studies. How did you make the move to demography?
I pretty much found demography at the same time that I had found sociology. And I tell my students that the way I came into demography is that I was taking a course at Pan American University as an undergraduate, and it was called Demography of the Southwest. And we were only 3 students. The class met on Thursday night, and the other 2 students never showed up to class. So it was a one-on-one, the professor and myself, Manuel Lopez, sociologist, demographer, and I learned a lot from him. And I learned how to use census data. I learned how to analyze, and that really opened my eyes and really gave me a career and being able to blend in sociology and demography.
Mm-hmm. So, a question we ask people frequently is, what is your why? So, 𝐥𝐤𝐤, what is your why?
Again, a lot of it was trying to bring attention to issues of inequality, racism, discrimination, and so forth. And that is what I continue to do. And in terms of the media kind of relations and so forth, that for long I criticized that we were completely underrepresented in terms of when people wanted to know about what was going on, they never came to people of color to ask us about that. So I see this as putting my putting action to where my mouth, or what is the word? You know what I mean. Yeah, kind of carrying out what I had been criticizing, that we had been underrepresented and so forth.
So, in a general sense, where do you think we as a nation stand regarding race relations?
We're still, as we can see, what's been going on with the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, the murder of other people of color by police, and so forth. That this country continues to. This is a country that was found on racism, and it is the case that it continues to be very much in line. There have been some improvements, of course, but the major foundation of racism is still part of this country, and the pandemic has really brought that out into the open, where we see people of color who have been disproportionately impacted in so many respects.
Yeah. Well, our topic tonight is population slowdown and aging, implications for higher education. Shall we jump in?
Yeah.
All right. First topic, understanding population change.
Yeah.
Tell us how birth, deaths, and migration fit into that.
Yeah, so when we're talk about how populations change, either when we're talking about communities, where we're talking about states, country, the world, and so forth, the populations change by what demographers call natural change, which is simply birth minus death. And then at the subglobal level is migration as well, the extent to which you have people who move into a particular country or a particular community, and people who leave. So that is what is called net migration. And for long, I think in this country, particularly with the Latino community, we had seen, probably in terms of net migration, internationally speaking, that it was represented about half of the population growth. The other half was by the population being very young, and more people being born than dying. But that's really changed dramatically over the last decade or so, particularly in the case of Latinos, and we've seen a significant reduction of immigration, particularly from Mexico.
The concept of migration, although there's a lot of attention given to it now, it is not new. That's how the world was populated. Am I right?
Exactly. Yeah, we've seen the movement. We've seen the colonization that we were talking about earlier today. The colonization of Europeans and whites going to different continents around the world: Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Antarctica, and so Oceania, and so forth, and dominating and conquering people of color, indigenous people of color, and so forth. Now, one of the things that we really have seen, kind of the change, is that we've seen in many European countries, Germany, Italy, and so forth, that we've seen we've seen significant aging of the population there, where you find, even in places like Japan. Japan is the oldest country in the world, where about 30% of Japanese are 65 and older. The United States wasn't aging as fast as other countries, simply because people of color were younger populations. So we're talking about Latinos, we're talking about African Americans, talking about Asians to a certain extent, and so forth, and migrants that have been coming in internationally, which tend to be younger. But we've seen in the white community, we've seen significant, what is now called natural decline, where there are now more whites that die in a given year than are born. There are more elderly individuals, 65 and older, compared to whites less than 18 years of age. The median age of whites is now about 45, and so forth. So we really have seen then in the US a major slowdown of the population growth, and particularly because we're also seeing the aging that is taking place in the African American community as well. That we've seen significant reductions in fertility among African Americans. We've seen it in the Latino community as well.
Mhm.
So we've seen that slowdown, and all of a sudden, then what was happening in places like Europe, what was in Japan, Singapore, and so forth, now is happening here in the United States as well.
And generally, we're not replacing ourselves.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
now, I just saw an article today that is talking about right now the lowest fertility rate in the United States. Now it's 1.6. So
Right.
on average, women would have a 1.6 babies over the course of their childbearing ages and so forth.
Mhm.
So we really have seen this major slowdown that was already taking place
Right.
before the pandemic, as we saw with the 2020 census, that
Mhm.
it showed that we're growing the slowest since the Great Depression. Although that if we look year by year, we're already growing slower than we did at that time. And then the pandemic has just made it worse.
Well, Rogelio, your comments about um, slowing down and about the aging population and the younger population, this is where the "you will not replace us" originates.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Where we see a lot of that race, the race hatred and so forth, and you've seen when you've had the demonstrations by right wing racist organizations and so forth that they always say we're not going to be replaced and so forth, and you see a lot of that conflict that is emergent,
Mhm.
racial animosity.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to our next topic: factors related to slowdown and aging.
Yep. So here's where we have the now that the U.S. is very much like European countries, Japan, and so forth, and you have three factors that are playing a role here. One is the aging of baby boomers. So baby boomers, we know they were born between 1946 and 1964. They've had an impact yeah, me too. Ever since they were born, 1946, 1964, the diaper industry became very, very important. It went for milk and so forth, building of schools, et cetera, et cetera. And in 2011, the first cohorts of baby boomers were born in 1946. They reached age 65, and it's going to happen all the way to 2029. So it's a massive aging of the U.S. population. And then we've also seen since the Great Recession, 2007, 2008, that we've seen a massive reduction in fertility in this country. And it's affected all of the racial and ethnic groups, but particularly Latina women. In particular, Latina women 10 years ago were having on average about 2.9 births each. And now it's down to 1.9. So it's a major slowdown that has taken place.
Now, let me stop you for a minute there. Let me
Yep.
stop you there. So, when we say for fertility drop, is that by choice or is that by consequence? For example, we know that particularly Black women die more in childbirth than
Exactly.
white women in the
Uh-huh.
United States. And in
Yep.
fact, I've read and heard people compare um, Black fertility, Black women's fertility, with third world countries.
Yep.
So, is this by choice or is this by consequence?
I think there are a variety of factors. I think one is the economic, aspects, and we saw it where we saw another major plunge in fertility occurred during the Great Depression, where that's where you have a very small cohort of babies that were born during the Great Depression. And I think that when you have the uncertainty that is taking place, where people are economically strapped and so forth, that people make the choices of foregoing fertility and so forth. And as you point out in the African American community, that we see the maternal mortality that has been at a very high level. And a couple of years ago, about 5, 6 years ago, when attention was being called to it, that was suggesting that African American women in particular were having maternal mortality rates that were as high as we find in developing countries.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we also find with African American women in terms of fertility, just like we have with Latina women, that they tend to also have babies when they're younger than when they're older as well, which is another of those factors that is a risk factor as well, plus poverty and the lack of healthcare insurance, the same thing that the pandemic has been exposing. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lack of prenatal care.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that would contribute to a declining population as well.
Yeah. And then the other factor has to do with, again, with the white population, that you see the aging of the population. And now for 3 years in a row at the national level, not only are we seeing that there are more whites that are dying than being born, but also that the population has been declining as well, from year to year. And that's what demographers. I've been in the business for now more than 3 decades, and those were the kind of population projections that we were suggesting that was going to be taking place 30 years ago. And now we're seeing
You're
these
seeing it now.
becoming actualized.
All right. So then, what effect does all of this have on the whole schooling business?
Yep.
K-12, higher education. What
Yep.
is the overall effect?
Yeah, so I did an article that appeared in the Journal of Hispanics in Higher Education, and it was looking at the college trends, enrollment trends, undergraduate enrollment trends over the period 2000 to 2017. And you look at that particular period, and it looks like that there was growth that was taking place in higher education. But then you kind of break it up from 2000 to 2008, and then 2009 to 2017. And that's really where you see the major changes that are taking place. And during that particular point in time, you see a significant reduction in enrollment, in undergraduate enrollment among whites. And even in the case of African Americans, you begin seeing a slight decrease, which has to do with the fertility declines that we had been seeing. So that we see, for example, in the population 18 to 24 years of age, between 2010 and 2019, with a white population, there were about 8% fewer persons 18 to 24 years of age, about 2% fewer African Americans 18 to 24 years of age, but 10% more Latinos 18 to 24 years of age. And that's really where you see then the shifting of the demography of undergraduates in higher education, that it has been Latinos that over that period, 2009 to 2017, were really driving that change. But we know with the Latino population in particular that it has been at the community college level, much more so than at the four-year institutions and so forth.
Oh, Rogelio, this one is filled with all types of subtopics. So I'm going to dig in if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right, so I know that in this last year, of course, with the pandemic, with education in general and in higher education, everything moved to online.
Yep.
And I just read today that some students decided to take their year off rather than go online. Besides that, a lot of students felt they were not getting their money's worth, paying a full ride and taking courses online. And a lot of students disappeared during that period. And Latinos were one of them, or exactly. Community college students was a major group of students who disappeared during the pandemic. So when you say there's a major decline in the 18 and 24 population, is that taking into account this pandemic year?
Here in this particular study, it was before the pandemic. It was 2017 was the latest data, but you're already seeing, you continue to see those patterns. And I just picked up an article that came out today, that I have it right here, that really talks about this. This is titled, it was in the Chronicle of Higher Education today, that is titled Spring Enrollments Final Count is in. Colleges lost 600,000 students. So 3.5% decline from the previous spring, and it has been, in particular, the population 18 to 24 has been has dropped more than the population 25 and older of undergraduates, and also community colleges are also experiencing greater degrees of decline during the pandemic, and some decline that we had already been seeing over the last decade, but particularly has become much more acute during the pandemic. And these are, of course, at the community colleges, it's people of color that are disproportionately in community colleges, people who have more limited resources, essentially people who have been hardest hit by the pandemic. So there's going to be major challenges that are going to be taking place.
Could we diverge just a moment and talk about the purpose, the mission of community colleges and the types of students, the profile of students community colleges serve?
Yep. So in many respects, what you have is, of course, the lower tuition. So the lower tuition, more affordable, and so forth. So that it has always been really has provided educational opportunities, career opportunities, opportunities for people to make the transition from the 2-year to the 4-year institutions, opportunities of upward mobility for people having employment, trade, whatever the case may be. So it plays a vital role. And many people who are in academia, who are professors and so forth, they started in the 2-year institution. So it's been extremely valuable. And we know, particularly right now in this administration, where President Biden, for example, has put a lot of emphasis in the growth of community colleges and so forth. So it plays that particular very vital role. Another thing that has been very interesting, and I had just read a blog a few days ago that is also showing how the growth in community colleges is associated also with the increases in unemployment rates and so forth, the retraining that has taken place. And this chart really showed where you have, over the last 20 years or so, where you've seen increases in unemployment in the country, you see increases in enrollment in community colleges. Unemployment rates go down, enrollments go down, and it's perfectly aligned until, and this person who blogged said, until the pandemic, all of a sudden you saw the unemployment go up, but at the same time you have a significant decline in enrollment.
Right. You sort of mentioned this. You sort of mentioned this earlier when you spoke about the disparate effect the pandemic had on, I'll say, minority race students and low income persons who were working in customer facing professions or fields. The pandemic had a disparate effect on them as opposed to those who were working in offices. Now, for that profile of students that you described attending community colleges, would they necessarily be the 18 to 24-year-old, or would they be what we would typically call a non-traditional student?
Right. Yeah, it's going to be a greater degree of non-traditional students in community colleges, and I think some of the latest analysis that I've seen have shown that first-time students, for example, 18 to 24-year-olds, that's really where we've seen a significant decline in community colleges as well. So, and I think that the extent to which we're going to see a greater diversification of students in community colleges is going to take place after the pandemic, as we see money that is being put forward for us to retrain students for other careers and so forth, that we're also going to probably see greater degrees of diversification and greater degrees of non-traditional students in
community colleges or in the 4-year schools.
And both, I think. But particularly, I think in the community colleges, where there's been a lot of effort having to do with retraining for new careers and so forth, particularly for individuals who have lost jobs that may not necessarily come back after the pandemic.
Yeah. Oh, that's very, very interesting, and I am paying close attention to that.
Yeah,
I am paying very, very close to that.
yeah,
Somehow, community colleges are close to my heart, and I know they serve a very good purpose in social economic mobility.
uh-huh.
And I would say community colleges are far more accessible than a four-year school. So people like you and me, kids like you and me, have an opportunity for social mobility through a community college.
Yeah, and right now I'm the chair of the board of Catch the Next, that does a lot of work with community colleges in terms of preparing students and so forth. And that's another of those efforts that you have organizations that are out there trying to provide as much preparation as well as assistance to make sure that students of color succeed in the community colleges, and those that you also have that transition that is made to the four-year institutions as well, and support for those who want to receive their training and for trades and so forth.
All right, let's move on to our next and last topic: challenges and opportunities.
Yeah. So the challenges are going to be many, 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 and we've seen, I think, in terms of the decrease that was taking place, that as the economy had gotten better before the pandemic, we had seen a lot of the community colleges experience declines in enrollment. We've seen the declines in enrollment during the pandemic and so forth. So there's going to be the need to try to provide whatever assistance is needed, financial assistance and so forth, making sure that students have the opportunity to come back to continue their studies. Yeah.
Well, in Texas right now, I just read that some of that ESSER money, that federal money, is going to support four-year schools and not necessarily directed at two-year schools, community colleges.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. So some of those disparities that we see, that people were opening their eyes when the pandemic came, when George Floyd got murdered, people that had been in denial, all of a sudden they're opening their eyes. But unfortunately, what happens is the momentum always supports that inequality in terms of that we've seen in terms of vaccinations. We've seen a variety of ways. People with more resources that have been able to get more. We saw it with small businesses, that it was the bigger businesses that were getting greater degrees of assistance and so forth. And this is really, I think, where we really need to make sure that we're electing politicians who are going to change the system rather than are going to reproduce the inequalities that have gotten us here, and that we need to change course.
So then, Rogelio, what would be your takeaway from our conversation? The main thing that you would want people to know?
Yeah, in terms of the major shifts that are taking place, and in the demography of the country, as well as in higher education, and the extent to which we're really seeing greater degrees of racial diversity in college campuses, and challenges that we face, that our children, our grandchildren face, in terms of being able to afford colleges and universities, greater degrees of opportunities that we need, and I cheer on community colleges for the role that they play in trying to bring about these changes and upward mobility and opening doors of opportunity for people of color.
And what's your call to action? What do you want people to do?
I think, again, we need to make sure that we're electing people who have that particular frame in mind, that are going to be able to make sure that they're supporting students who are poor, students of color, so that they succeed. Because as we go in terms of students of color and so forth, and people of color, as we advance, so does the nation, because this is with these demographic shifts that I've mentioned. It's not the white population that is growing tremendously. It's people of color that are the ones that are growing. And the future of this country is going to depend even more so on us. And we need to make those transitions. And we need to elect people that have that in mind and that are going to push to make sure that we're adequately represented, adequately welcomed to the opportunity structure, and that we're part of this country. We're not the other that we talked about.
And if people wanted to contact you, how would they do so?
My email is rogelio.saenz@utsa.edu. I don't think I put it here, but I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, and muckrack as well. And anyway, that's the way I can be contacted. And yep.
Well, I would like to thank you, of course, and then all of our guests who are with us this evening and hearing and listening to our conversation regarding population slowdown and aging and implications for higher education. Our guest was Rogelio Saenz, and I'm David Johnson of Transform Ed Consulting. And thanks again to Cassandra Williams and Educational Innovations 360 Degrees. And I wish you all a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, David.